15 years of sleeping in shipping containers bought me this moment, or so I thought. I stood on the porch of the home I paid for, watching through the window as my 30-year-old son scrubbed the floor on his knees. Strangers sat on my furniture, drinking wine and barking orders at him like he was hired help. I did not knock. I gripped my suitcase handle and realized that stealing my house was the least of their crimes. My name is Eleanor Hartley, and at 59 years old, I felt every single day of my age in my stiff joints as the automatic doors of the airport terminal slid open. The air of Grey Ridge, Illinois, hit me. But it did not smell like home. It smelled of gasoline and change. I had spent 15 years working double shifts in ports across Europe, sleeping in narrow bunks and eating cold meals, all to buy a future that was supposed to start today. I sat by the window on the bus ride from the airport, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. America had molted like a snake shedding its skin while I was away, where the old steel mill used to be. A glittering shopping complex now stood, blinding in the afternoon sun. The corner diner where I used to buy Evan chocolate milkshakes was gone, replaced by a sleek bank with blue neon lights. I felt a strange dislocation, like a ghost haunting a future I did not build. I was a stranger in my own country, clutching a handle that was the only anchor I had left. I got off at the stop for Maple Hollow. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that made my hands shake as I gripped the handle of my battered suitcase. I walked down the quiet suburban street, counting the house numbers. And then I saw it. The white picket fence, the old elm tree casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, the porch where I had imagined sipping tea in my retirement. It looked exactly like the photos Evan had sent me over the years. My chest swelled with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. I did this. I paid for every brick and every blade of grass. I walked up the driveway, rehearsing the lines I had whispered to myself in the dark for a decade. I'm home, son. Look, I made it. I reached for the doorbell, but my hand froze in midair. A voice, sharp and biting, cut through the wood of the front door. No, that is not good enough. Scrub it again. Do not leave a single streak this time. The tone was not just angry, it was contemptuous. It was the voice one uses for a dog that has soiled the carpet. I lowered my hand, my blood running cold. The front door was slightly ajar, just a crack. I pushed it open, just an inch, enough to see into the living room. The air left my lungs. Evan was there, my boy. He was 30 years old now, broad-shouldered, a man grown, but he was on his knees. He wore a faded grey t-shirt that I did not recognize, and he was holding a dripping sponge over a bucket of grey water. Yes. Yes. Melissa, Evan said. His voice was hollow, devoid of any spirit. I shifted my angle to see who he was speaking to. Melissa sat on the plush beige sofa, my sofa holding a crystal wine glass. She looked pristine, untouched by labor, her legs crossed elegantly. Beside her sat an older couple, a man with silver hair and a woman dripping in gold jewelry. I recognized them from the wedding photos Evan had sent years ago, Victor and Irene Blackwood. They sipped their wine with the casual arrogance of people who believe the world exists to serve them. I stepped back, my boot crunching softly on a dry leaf. I scrambled behind the large hydrangeas bordering the porch, my heart thumping so hard I feared they would hear it. Victor, dear, Irene said, swirling her wine as she watched my son scrub the floor. We really must talk about the maintenance costs. If he is going to stay here, He needs to understand that utilities are not free. I agree, Victor replied, his voice a low rumble of authority. We might have to increase the rent deduction for live-in staff. It is only fair. Live-in staff. The words slapped me harder than a physical blow. I covered my mouth to stifle a gasp. Through the window, I saw Evan pause. He turned his head slightly toward the glass, and for a second, the light caught his face. He looked exhausted. There was a deep, etched sorrow in his eyes that made him look 10 years older than he was. Evan Irene barked, snapping her fingers. More wine. And take these napkins away. The sorrow vanished from Evan's face, replaced instantly by a practiced, plastic smile that broke my heart. Right away. Irene. I am sorry about the mess, Evan said. He stood up, wiped his hands on his pants, and hurried to refill their glasses. He moved with the muscle memory of a servant, bowing his head slightly as he poured. I could not go in. If I walked in there now, I would scream, and I would not stop screaming until I tore that house apart. I backed away, dragging my suitcase over the grass to avoid making noise on the pavement. I crossed the street and stood in the shadows of the neighbour's oak tree. I looked back at the house that bore my name on the deed locked in a bank vault. It glowed with warmth, but it was a lie. I turned and walked toward the highway, away from the reunion I had dreamed of. I found a motel with a flickering neon sign that read, "Vacancy." The room smelled of stale smoke and lemon cleaner. I sat on the edge of the sagging bed and opened the curtains. I could just make out the roof of my house in the distance, a dark silhouette against the twilight sky. I did not cry. The tears had dried up somewhere between Antwerp and Lisbon years ago. Instead, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I would not knock on that door. Not yet. I needed to know why my son was a maid in the house I bought for his freedom. I needed to know who put that leash around his neck before I cut it off. The fluorescent light in the motel room buzzed like a dying fly, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the cheap bedspread. I sat cross-legged on the mattress, my old metal tin box open on my lap. It was a time capsule of the life I had traded away. Inside lay a stack of yellowing envelopes, transfer slips from Northbridge lines, and a copy of the deed to the house on Maple Hollow. I picked up a pay stub from 12 years ago. The paper was thin and worn. It took me back to the nights when I was just a warehouse worker in Greyridge, stacking boxes until my back screamed, terrified that a single broken arm would leave Evan and me starving. When my ex-husband walked out, he left nothing but silence and unpaid bills. I took the job on the international cargo ships not because I wanted to see the world, but because Northbridge Lines offered triple the pay and full insurance. I will be back before you finish high school. Evan? I had told him the day I left. I promise. That promise felt like a stone in my throat now. I remembered the freezing rain at the port of Antwerp, where I slept in a retrofitted shipping container that smelled of diesel and dead fish because I wanted to save the lodging allowance. I remembered the blistering heat of Barcelona and the loneliness of Lisbon, where I worked 16 hours a day, hauling crates until my hands were calloused and cracked, every month. I marched to the transfer office and sent $3,000 home. Every cent was a brick in the wall of the house that was supposed to keep my boy safe. I shuffled through Evan's letters. The ones from the early years were thick, bursting with drawings and stories about his grades and his friends. "Mum, I got an A in history today," he had written in his sprawling cursive. I miss you. But Mrs. Gable says you are a hero. But as the years passed, the ink grew thinner. The letters became short notes, then sporadic emails printed out and folded into squares. The joy evaporated, replaced by vague reassurances. Everything is fine, Mum. Do not worry about me. 5 years ago, he wrote to tell me he had married Melissa. She was from a very good family. He said, he sent 3 photos. They looked rushed, like an afterthought. I had booked a ticket home for the ceremony, but a crane accident on the dock in Hamburg crushed my ankle and pinned me to a hospital bed for 2 months. By the time I could walk, the contract had been extended, and I needed the money to finish paying off the mortgage. I thought I was sacrificing my presence to secure his future. I picked up the photo of Evan at 10 years old. He was standing in front of the frame of the Maple Hollow house before the drywall went up. He was holding a plastic toy key up to the sky, grinning like he owned the world. "This is our castle, right?" he had asked me. I looked at that smiling boy, and then the image of the man kneeling on the floor tonight flashed in my mind. The contrast made me nauseous. Had I done this? Had 15 years of absence carved a hole in him so deep that he let these people fill it with servitude? I left him to make him strong. But perhaps I had just left him alone. I set the box aside and opened my battered laptop. The screen flickered to life, and I logged into my American bank account. I needed to see the mortgage status. I navigated to the property tax history and the insurance payments. My eyes narrowed. There were fees I did not recognize, service charges, and then a series of strange legal notations attached to the property record from 3 years ago. Transfer of administrative oversight. I read aloud, my voice rasping in the empty room. The name attached to the transaction was not a bank. It was a company called Harborstone Equity Group. I had never heard of them. I had never signed a paper with that name. I clicked deeper, my fingers flying over the keys. The payments for the last 2 years had not come from my account, but from a routing number linked to Harborstone. "What have you done? Evan," I whispered to the empty room. "What have they made you do?" The sadness that had weighed on me since the airport began to harden into something colder, something sharp. This was not just a case of a bad marriage or a disrespectful in-law. Someone had moved the pieces on the board while I was looking away. I closed the laptop with a snap. They thought the owner of the house was a ghost who would never return from the sea. They were wrong. I did not storm the front door the next morning. Years of negotiating contracts in foreign tongues had taught me that information was more valuable than brute force. I needed to know the terrain before I launched my attack. I bought a beige trench coat from a thrift store and tied a patterned silk scarf around my head, transforming myself into just another nondescript widow looking for a retirement spot. I set up camp at a window seat in The Daily Grind, a coffee shop on the corner of Maple Hollow, with a clear view of the street leading to my house. The owner, a chatty woman named Rosa Martinez, poured my black coffee with a smile that hinted she was desperate for a new ear to bend. "You are new to the area?" Rosa asked, wiping down the counter. "Just looking," I said, blowing on the steam. I noticed that beautiful white house with the big elm tree down the street. It seems very well maintained. Rosa nodded knowingly. "Oh, the Blackwood place." "Yes, it is stunning. Victor Blackwood poured a fortune into renovating it. New roof, new siding. He is a very successful man." My grip on the ceramic mug tightened until my knuckles turned white. "Blackwood, I saw a young man working in the yard. Is that his son?" Rosa leaned in, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. That is Evan. He is, well, he is the son-in-law. Poor guy. He had some trouble a few years back. Financial ruin, I hear. If he had not married Melissa Blackwood, he would probably be on the street. Victor and Irene are saints for letting him stay there, even if he has to earn his keep. Earn his keep? I asked, my voice flat. You know, Rosa shrugged. He helps around the house. It is the least he can do, right? I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and thanked her. The narrative had been completely rewritten. In the eyes of the neighborhood, my son was a charity case living on the benevolence of the people who had stolen his inheritance. That evening, I returned to the street under the cover of a freezing drizzle. I walked past the house, pulling my collar up to hide my face. The house was a fortress now. I spotted small, blinking red lights in the corners of the porch, new security cameras. Motion-activated floodlights stared blankly at the driveway. And there, screwed into the wood of the fence I had paid for, was a brass plaque, the Blackwood residence. It was as if the name Hartley had been scrubbed from existence with bleach. The side door opened, and I stepped behind the trunk of the elm tree. Evan stepped out into the rain, struggling with a heavy black garbage bag. He looked thinner than I remembered. Melissa stood in the doorway, dry and warm in a cashmere sweater, her arms crossed. Careful, Evan, she snapped, her voice cutting through the sound of the rain. Last week you spilled coffee grounds on the pavers. The neighbors stared at us for days. It was humiliating. Victor appeared behind her, holding a glass of red wine. He leaned against the doorframe, watching my son struggle with the heavy load in the wet grass. Let him be, Melissa, Victor said, a smirk playing on his lips. If he cannot pay the rent, the least he can do is keep the place spotless. Labor is the currency of the poor, after all. Evan flinched, his shoulders hunching as if anticipating a blow, but he said nothing. He just dragged the bag to the curb. Just then, an elderly neighbor walked by with a poodle. She waved at the porch. Good evening, Melissa. The house looks lovely tonight. Your parents have done wonders with the landscaping. Melissa beamed, waving back. Thank you, Mrs. Higgins' daddy really loves this project. Evan stood there in the rain, invisible. He tied the knot on the bag, his hands shaking slightly, and kept his head down. He did not correct them. He did not scream. It was a silence born of total defeat. I realized then that this was not just about a stolen deed. It was a psychological prison. They had convinced a grown man that he was worthless, that he owed them his life for the privilege of being their servant. I left before I did something reckless. I drove straight to a local real estate office 10 minutes before they closed. I walked up to the young agent at the desk. I am interested in the property on Maple Hollow. I lied. I want to make an offer. Can you tell me the estimated value? The agent tapped on his keyboard. Let me check the registry. I am sorry, ma'am. That property is not held by an individual. It is listed under a corporate trust, Harborstone Equity Group. It is marked as a long-term hold asset. Harborstone, I repeated. Not Victor. A company. A faceless shield. I drove back to the motel and stood in front of the chipped bathroom mirror. I looked at the lines on my face, the grey in my hair. I had been hiding in the shadows for 2 days, gathering pieces of a puzzle that made me want to burn the world down. But patience had run its course. No more watching, I told my reflection. I practiced the tone I would use. Not the grieving mother, not the tired worker. I needed to be the woman who had commanded crews of rough men on the docks of Rotterdam. Tomorrow, I would walk up that driveway, and I would not be asking for permission. I needed to look Evan in the eye and break the spell before it was too late. I waited until the clock struck noon. I watched from across the street as Victor and Irene drove off in their silver sedan, golf clubs rattling in the trunk. 10 minutes later, Melissa's sleek convertible pulled out, heading toward her design studio. The house was finally unprotected. I walked up the driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed inside, a sound I remembered choosing from a catalogue 20 years ago. The door opened. Evan stood there, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked past me at first, his eyes glazed over with the dull resignation of someone expecting a delivery or a complaint. "We do not need any soliciting today. Thank you," he recited mechanically. I lowered my sunglasses. "Evan." He froze. The rag dropped from his hand, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear a hallucination. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Mom." "Is that you?" I stepped forward, my arms open, ready to crush him against me, to bridge the 15 years of silence with a single embrace. But he did not hug me back. Panic seized his face. He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, and yanked me inside. "You cannot be here," he hissed, looking frantically toward the street. "If they see you?" "Mom, you have to hide." He did not take me to the living room. He dragged me through the kitchen, past the gleaming granite countertops, and opened the door to the basement. We descended into the cool, damp air. He pulled me into the laundry room. I looked around, and my stomach turned over. Beside the humming dryer was a narrow, folding cot with a thin grey blanket. A stack of books served as a nightstand. My son, a 30-year-old man, was sleeping in the laundry room of a 4-bedroom house. "Evan," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely suppress. "Why are you sleeping next to the furnace?" He collapsed onto the cot, burying his face in his hands. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. Mum, I messed everything up." I sat beside him, the springs of the cot creaking under our weight. "Talk to me. Tell me everything." He took a jagged breath, his shoulders trembling. "It started 3 years ago. You sent that power of attorney so I could handle the taxes while you were in Europe. Victor, he had this investment opportunity, Harborstone Equity. He said we could double our money in 6 months. He needed collateral. You used the house," I said flatly. "I didn't want to." Evan looked up, tears streaming down his face. "But Melissa, she said you were never coming back. She said you abandoned us. She said if I loved her, I would help her family. So I signed the guarantee." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. The investment crashed. Victor lost everything. The debt collectors started calling. Then Victor brought in his lawyer, Garrick Pierce. Garrick said he could save us from foreclosure. He made me sign new papers, transferring the title to a holding company under Harborstone. He said it was just a shell to protect the asset. He said we could stay as tenants with reduced rent. I stared at the spinning drum of the washing machine. "And now you are the caretaker." "Victor says I owe him," Evan whispered. "He says he saved me from bankruptcy. He pays me a stipend that goes straight back into the rent. Melissa." She changed. "Mom." She acts like I am her employee now. She says I am lucky they did not kick me out on the street. Why didn't you leave? I asked, grabbing his shoulders. Why didn't you call me? I tried to leave, Evan said, his voice dropping to a terrified murmur. But Garrick. He told me that on the loan application for the investment, there was false information about my income. Victor put it there, but I signed it. They said if I leave or try to sue, they will send the file to the district attorney. They will put me in jail for fraud. Mom and Victor. He promised he would blackball me so I would never work in this city again. He looked at me with the eyes of a trapped animal. I was scared. I am so scared. I just wanted to keep the family together. The image of the boy holding the plastic key overlaid the broken man before me. They had weaponized his love and his fear. They had stolen his spine before they stole the house. I took his rough, calloused hands in mine. I squeezed them until he looked at me. Listen to me. Evan? I said, my voice hard as steel. I never signed a transfer. I gave you power of attorney for management, not to sell my property to a shell company. The original deed is sitting in a safety deposit box at the First National Bank. It has my name on it, not Harborstone, not Blackwood. But the papers I signed are worth nothing if they were based on fraud. I cut him off. You think you are trapped, but you are only trapped because you are playing by their rules. I did not spend 15 years hauling crates in the freezing rain to let a country club con artist turn my son into a servant. I stood up, the cramped laundry room feeling suddenly too small for the war I was about to declare. We are not going to run, Evan, and you are not going to scrub another floor for that man. We are going to take it all back. I walked into the First National Bank branch in downtown Greyridge, with the cold focus of a captain navigating through a storm. I requested a meeting with the branch manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who still remembered me from the days I deposited my first checks from Northbridge Lines. When I demanded the original mortgage files and the power of attorney records, he looked nervous, but he complied. Spread out on his mahogany desk, the story of the theft became clear. There were photocopies of documents I had supposedly signed, authorizing the transfer of the title to a holding trust. But when I held them up to the light, the truth revealed itself in the ink. The signatures on the copies were slightly pixelated, a digital cut-and-paste job, and the dates on the day I allegedly signed the transfer in Illinois. My passport stamps proved I was docking a container ship in Hamburg. I did not sign these, I told Henderson, tapping the paper, and you are going to help me prove it. I needed a shark, not a mediator. I found Nadia Klein in a cramped office above a dry cleaner. She had a reputation for suing developers and winning. I laid the bank records on her desk, right next to her half-eaten sandwich. She flipped through them, her eyes sharpening behind thick glasses. This is the Harborstone special, Nadia said, leaning back in her creaking chair. They use shell companies to confuse the title history. They pressure distressed owners into temporary transfers to avoid foreclosure. Then they bury you in paperwork until you give up. Usually, it works because the owners are broke and scared. But you are a ghost. I was a ghost, I corrected her. Now I am the landlord. We have a rare advantage, Nadia said, tapping a pen against her chin. You were physically on another continent. It is impossible for you to have notarized these. We are going to hit them on two fronts. I will handle the paper trail. I will bury them in discovery requests. Your job is to make them panic. When people panic, they make mistakes. I left her office and went to work. I pulled out my old contact book from my days in logistics. I made a call to a friend in Rotterdam, a port authority officer who tracked corporate registrations. It took him 3 hours to get back to me. Harbourstone Equity Group had dissolved a subsidiary in Belgium 4 years ago, just before a money laundering investigation launched. They were not legitimate investors. They were scavengers. I stopped at an electronics store and bought a digital voice recorder the size of a pack of gum. It cost me $80, but it was worth more than gold. I met Evan in the alley behind the supermarket where he bought groceries for the Blackwoods. He looked over his shoulder, terrified. "Take this," I said, slipping the recorder into his hand. "Sew it into the lining of your apron. When Victor starts drinking, when Garrick comes over to gloat, you turn it on. Be the furniture. Evan. Be the invisible servant they turned you into. They will not watch their tongues around a maid." "What if they find it?" Evan asked, his voice trembling. "They won't," I said, gripping his arm. "Because they do not look at you. Evan. They look through you. Use that." I also told him to start leaving the laundry room door cracked open whenever Victor called him downstairs for a lecture. I needed to establish a pattern of verbal abuse. Over the next few days, I became a fixture at Rosa's coffee shop. I was the nice widow who loved to listen. I steered conversations toward real estate, toward the Blackwoods. I wrote down everything in a hardbound notebook. Rosa told me about the time Victor bragged to a neighbor that he got the house for a steal because the owner was dead or as good as... Another neighbor mentioned seeing Garrick Pierce coming and going late at night with stacks of files. Back in my motel room, I pinned the photocopies, the notes from my call with Rotterdam, and the legal strategy Nadia had outlined onto the wall. It looked like a map of a battle I was finally ready to fight. For 15 years. I had been the provider, sending checks into the void. Now, staring at the evidence of their greed, I felt a shift. I was no longer just a mother. I was the captain of this ship, and I was about to steer them all straight into the rocks. Victor decided to hand us the knife himself. He organized an intimate gathering for the weekend to showcase the Harbourstone model home, which was, of course, my house on Maple Hollow. It was the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable, and it provided the perfect stage for our counterattack. Evan slipped me the guest list during a trash run. It was a roll call of vultures. Garrick Pierce was attending, along with Lyle Mercer, a man known in the city as a cold-blooded asset liquidator for Harbourstone. I handed the list to Nadia, my lawyer. She smiled a razor-thin smile and made a call to Noah Price, an investigative journalist with a grudge against corporate fraud. We dressed Noah in a tailored suit and gave him a backstory as a silent partner from Nadia's firm. Before the main event, I needed to prime the pump. I tracked Melissa to the upscale supermarket on 4th Street. I waited until she was browsing imported cheeses. Then I rolled my cart past hers, fumbling with a jar of olives. "Oh, excuse me?" I said, putting on my best hapless neighbor act. "You live in that stunning white house on Maple, don't you? I drive by it every day. It must have cost a fortune to buy a place with such history." Melissa preened, tossing her hair back. "It is a gem. My parents helped us secure it. It takes a lot of resources to maintain the standards of the neighborhood. I heard a rumor it used to belong to a woman named Hartley." I probed gently, clutching my handbag where my phone was recording. "Did she sell it to you?" Melissa let out a dismissive laugh. "Oh, please. That old paper trail doesn't mean anything anymore. The Hartley deed is..." Well, let us just say it is irrelevant. Everything is safely locked in the Harborstone Trust now. I smiled as I felt the phone vibrate in my bag. That sounds very smart. The night of the party, the rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and cold. Nadia, Noah, and I walked up the driveway. We were introduced as potential investors from a European consortium who had worked with Harborstone in the past. Victor's eyes lit up at the smell of fresh money. He did not recognize me. To him, Eleanor Hartley was a faceless name on a deed, a ghost rotting in a shipping container somewhere across the Atlantic. Welcome. Welcome. Victor boomed, ushering us into the foyer. Please, make yourselves at home. We call this the jewel of the portfolio. My heart seized when I saw Evan. He was wearing a white shirt and black vest, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. He looked at me for a split second, his eyes widening in terror. But I gave him a barely perceptible nod. He lowered his gaze and offered a drink to Lyle Mercer. Keep them coming, boy. Lyle grunted, not even looking at him. Victor was eager to impress Lyle and us. He herded the VIPs into the study, my study, where he had set up a large monitor displaying blueprints. The beauty of the Harborstone strategy, Victor said, swirling his scotch, is that we target properties that are effectively ownerless. The owners go abroad, they get old, they forget. We step in, renovate, and by the time anyone notices, the title is buried under 3 layers of corporate shells. Is that legal? Noah asked, his voice casually curious, leaning against the bookshelf where we had hidden a small microphone moments earlier. Victor laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. Legal is a flexible term, my friend. It is about possession. Evan entered the room to refill the ice bucket. He moved silently, but I saw his hand brush against his apron pocket, checking the device I had given him. Lyle Mercer leaned forward. But the Hartley case... I heard the son was still in the picture. That can be messy. Victor waved his hand dismissively, sloshing amber liquid over the rim of his glass. The son Evan is a soft touch. The kid was so desperate to please my daughter and me that he signed a blank power of attorney document. He thought it was for tax management. The room went quiet, save for the clink of ice as Evan worked. A blank power of attorney? I asked, keeping my voice steady. That is quite a risk. Not when you have a lawyer like Garrick. Victor grinned, clapping Garrick on the shoulder. We just filled in the blanks later, added a few clauses about asset transfer and debt collateral. By the time the idiot realized the house was gone, he was already grateful we let him sleep in the basement. No court can save him now. The laughter that followed was raucous and cruel. I looked at Evan. He was standing by the bar cart, his knuckles white as he gripped the ice tongs. He wasn't looking at the floor anymore. He was looking at Victor, and for the first time, the recording light on his soul was blinking red. We had it. We had the confession, the conspiracy, and the fraud, all delivered in their own arrogant voices. The adrenaline from the party faded as soon as the last car pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the noise. While Nadia and Noah huddled in the van down the street to back up the audio files, I slipped back into the laundry room. I expected to find Evan relieved, perhaps even triumphant that we had caught Victor on tape. Instead, he was sitting on the edge of his cot, his head in his hands, shaking violently. We got them. Evan? I said softly, closing the door behind me. We have the proof. He looked up, and his face was not the face of a winner. It was the face of a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine. "It does not matter. Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Even if we win the house, I lose." I frowned, pulling the folding chair closer to him. "What are you talking about? They stole your inheritance. We are taking it back." "You do not understand," Evan said, tears spilling over his lashes. "There is something I did not tell you, because I knew if I told you, you would go to war, and then they would take her away." "Take who away?" "Lily," he choked out. "My daughter? She is 6 years old." The air left the room. I sat frozen, the name hanging in the air between us. Lily, a granddaughter. I had a granddaughter. "She lives with Melissa in the townhouse on the north side," Evan continued, his words rushing out now like blood from a wound. "When things got bad, when the investment crashed, Melissa filed for primary custody. Victor hired the best lawyers in the state. They painted me as unstable. They said I was financially dependent on a mother who had abandoned me for 15 years to live in Europe. They said I had no assets, no home of my own." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if my heart were cracking under the weight of my own choices. My absence had been their weapon. "Victor made me a deal," Evan said, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "He said, if I signed the papers, if I stayed here and kept the house running, he would not block my visitation. He lets me see her every Saturday. But he told me, he said, if I ever tried to sue, or if I ever tried to leave, he would petition the court again. He would use this house, the fact that I am living in a basement, to prove I cannot provide a stable environment. He said he would make sure I never saw her again." "He is using a child as a shield?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He does not care about Lily." Evan spat, a flash of anger finally breaking through his fear. "He cares about control. I scrub his floors. I serve his drinks. All so I can have 4 hours a week with my little girl. That is the price. Mom. And I pay it. I would pay it 1,000 times." I stood up and paced the small room, the smell of bleach suddenly suffocating. I had thought this was a battle over bricks and mortar, over pride and money. But it was a hostage situation. I called Nadia immediately. Her voice on the phone was grim when I told her. "This complicates things. Eleanor," Nadia said. "If we push too hard, too fast, Victor will poison the well. He will tell the child you are the villain who is trying to destroy her family. And in family court, perception is everything. Lily could be our greatest strength if we can prove he is alienating her from her father. But it is a double-edged sword." I hung up and looked at my son. He looked so small in that moment, so terrified. "Mom," Evan pleaded, reaching for my hand. "Please. Just let it go. Let them keep the house. We can leave. I will find a job somewhere else, as long as I can still see her. I do not care about the rest. I cannot lose her." His words were a knife in my gut. They were an echo of my own voice 15 years ago, standing on a rainy dock, telling myself that leaving my son was the only way to save him. I had run away to build a future, and in doing so, I had left the door open for wolves to walk in. Now, Evan wanted to run away to save his connection to his daughter. I gripped his hand tight. I thought of the 6-year-old girl I had never met. I thought of Evan on his knees, scrubbing a floor that belonged to him. "No," I said firmly. "Mom? No. Evan," I interrupted, my voice shaking with a fierce resolve I had not felt since the day I left America. We do not run, not this time. If we leave now, Victor owns you forever. You want Lily to grow up seeing her father as a servant. You want her to learn that the only way to survive is to bow your head to men like Victor Blackwood. I pulled him up from the cot and looked him in the eye. We are going to get the house back, I said. And we are going to get your daughter back. We are going to take everything. I did not come home to watch another generation of this family live on their knees. The war had shifted from gathering intelligence to open combat, and the enemy fired the first volley with terrifying precision. Nadia called me into her office 2 days later, her face grim. Harborstone and Garrick had responded to our initial demand for records, not with silence, but with a stack of documents. "Look at this," Nadia said, sliding a photocopy across her desk. It was a transfer of deed, dated 3 years ago. At the bottom was my signature. My breath hitched. It was not just a forgery. It was a masterpiece. It had the same loop on the E, the same sharp strike on the T. For a second, I felt a cold shiver of doubt run down my spine. Had I signed something in a fog of exhaustion between shifts? "It is perfect," I whispered. "Too perfect." "Exactly," Nadia said, pointing with her pen. "Look at the stroke width. It is uniform. A real pen varies in pressure. This was lifted digitally from an old check or a letter and stamped onto the page. But Eleanor, proving that in court requires a forensic handwriting analyst, that takes weeks. In the meantime, they still hold the keys." The pressure mounted outside the lawyer's office too. Victor was not a stupid man. He had noticed the change in Evan, the way my son no longer flinched quite so hard, the way he held his head a fraction higher, and he had noticed the widow neighbour asking too many questions. That evening, I saw a black sedan parked across from my motel. It sat there for 2 hours, the engine idling. When I drove to Rosa's cafe, it followed. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the silhouette of a man staring right at me. He did not try to hide. It was a message: "We know you are watching, and we can touch you whenever we want." But the real blow came through Evan. He met me at the motel late that night, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Melissa talked to me," he said, pacing the small room. "She said her parents are very stressed about some legal harassment regarding the house. She said, if I cannot control my mother, then clearly I am not creating a stable environment for Lily." "She is threatening your visitation?" I asked, feeling the blood pound in my ears. "She said they might need to suspend the weekend visits to protect Lily's mental peace until this blows over." Evan's voice cracked. "Mom, I cannot lose her. I cannot go weeks without seeing her." "That is exactly what they want you to feel," I said, though my own heart was racing. I wanted to storm the townhouse and demand to see my granddaughter, but I knew that would play right into Victor's hands. Nadia had a different plan. "We need to counterpunch," she told me over the phone. "Noah is running the article tomorrow, and you need to see Lily, but on our terms. A public place, cameras, witnesses. Somewhere Victor cannot drag you away without making a scene." The next morning, Noah's article hit the local news website. It was vague but damning, titled "The Ghost Landlords of Greyridge," featuring a silhouette of a house that was unmistakably Maple Hollow. It described a predatory fund seizing assets from absent owners. The comments section exploded with locals sharing similar stories. Harborstone reacted like a wounded shark. Garrick Pierce sent a cease and desist letter threatening a lawsuit for defamation and breach of confidentiality. But then, he played his ace. He contacted Evan directly, bypassing Nadia. Evan showed up at my door that night, clutching a letter from Garrick. He looked torn in two. "They made an offer, Mum," Evan said, holding the paper like it was a lifeline. "Garrick says if we drop the inquiry and sign a non-disclosure agreement, they will restructure the rental agreement. They will forgive 50% of the debt I supposedly owe. They will put it in writing that I can stay in the house for another 5 years. It is a trap." "Evan," I said, snatching the paper from him. "It is a bribe to make us go away so they can keep the house forever. 50% of a fake debt is still theft." "But it stops the fight," Evan shouted, the veins in his neck bulging. "It stops them from taking Lily away, Mom. I am tired. I am so tired of being afraid. Maybe we should just take it." "If you sign this, you admit the debt is real," I shot back, gripping his shoulders. "You admit the house is theirs, and in 5 years, when they kick you out, you will have nothing, no house, no dignity, and Lily will still belong to them." "I just want to see my daughter," he cried, pulling away from me. "You do not understand because you left." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the weapon he had never used, and now it was out. "I left to build you a house, not a prison," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I am not signing this, and neither are you. We are walking a tightrope. Evan, if we fall now, we die. But if we keep walking, we take it all. Do not let them buy you with a discount on your own slavery." Evan stared at me, his chest heaving, caught between the easy lie and the hard truth. We were on the edge of the cliff, and I honestly did not know if he would jump or stand his ground. "We are done playing defense," Nadia said, slapping a thick file onto her desk. "It is time to drop the hammer." She laid out the plan with the precision of a surgeon. We were filing for an emergency temporary restraining order to freeze any assets related to Maple Hollow. The evidence was a trifecta: the original bank documents I had retrieved, the flight records proving I was in Germany when I supposedly signed the transfer, and the audio recording of Victor bragging about the theft. "Once the judge sees this, Harborstone is paralyzed," Nadia explained. "And while they are frozen, Noah launches the missile." Noah was sitting in the corner, typing furiously. He had drafted a blistering exposé on Harborstone's absentee owner scheme, using my house as the centerpiece. He was just waiting for the court stamp to hit send. But I needed one more nail in the coffin. I needed Victor to confirm his arrogance to my face. I walked into the Emerald Greens Country Club at 2 p.m. The hostess tried to stop me, but I marched straight to the lounge where Victor held court. He was there with Garrick, laughing over a tumbler of scotch. I walked right up to their table and dropped a photocopy of the original deed onto the coaster. "We need to talk," I said. "And this time, I am not the neighbor." Victor looked up, his face flushing red. "Who do you think you are?" "I am Eleanor Hartley," I said, my voice steady. "And I am here to give you one chance to walk away before I burn your little empire to the ground." Victor let out a short, incredulous laugh. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a menacing growl. "You have nothing, Eleanor. You are a ghost. You think a judge is going to care about your sob story? Your son signed those papers. He signed them blank because he is a spineless coward who would sell his mother for a pat on the head." "So you admit he signed them blank?" I asked, looking him in the eye. You admit you filled in the transfer details after the fact. I admit that I am smarter than you, Victor sneered, tapping the table. And I have more money than you. In this country, that is all that matters. I felt the recorder in my pocket capture every syllable. We will see. While I handled Victor, Nadia was opening a second front. She had brought in a family law specialist to file a motion regarding Lily. We were arguing that Victor was using the child as a tool for extortion and that the environment at the Blackwood house, where her father was treated as a servant, was psychologically damaging. But we needed proof that I was not the monster they claimed I was. On Wednesday, Melissa took Lily to her art class at the public library. Evan had tipped me off. I sat at a table nearby, reading a book. When Lily wandered over to the water fountain, Evan gave me a subtle nod. I looked up and smiled. That is a lovely painting you have there. Is it a dragon? Lily looked at me with big, curious eyes. It is a dinosaur. Ah, my son used to love dinosaurs, I said, introducing myself. I am Ms. Ellie, a friend of your dad. Did he ever tell you about the time he tried to hatch a chicken egg in his pocket? Lily giggled, shaking her head. For 10 minutes, I told her silly, gentle stories about the boy Evan used to be. She laughed, a bright, unburdened sound that made my heart ache. I did not hug her. I did not cry. I just let her see that I was safe. Above us. The library security camera blinked silently, recording a grandmother and granddaughter connecting without fear. The blow landed on Friday morning. The court granted the hearing for the temporary restraining order. Summons were served to Harbiston, Garrick, and the Blackwoods. I heard from Evan that the Blackwood house was in chaos. Victor was screaming at Garrick. Melissa was crying. The invincible facade had cracked. That night, I sat on the cold metal bench outside my motel room. The neon sign buzzed overhead. I closed my eyes and smelled the salt air of the Antwerp docks from 15 years ago. I had left Evan to save him, but I had almost lost him. Tomorrow, walking into that courtroom, I was not fighting for bricks and mortar. I was fighting to rewrite the ending of a story I had started writing the day I boarded that ship. This was my chance to tell my son that he was worth more than a house. He was worth a war. The courtroom in the Grey Ridge District Courthouse was packed to the rafters. Noah's article had done its work, turning a property dispute into a public spectacle about corporate greed. I sat beside Nadia, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Across the aisle, the Blackwoods sat like royalty in exile. Victor wore a suit that cost more than my first car, but his leg was bouncing nervously. Melissa looked pale, her eyes darting around the room, while Garrick Pierce sat with the icy detachment of a reptile. Lyle Mercer, representing Harbiston, looked bored, as if he were waiting for a bus rather than a verdict. The lawyer for Harbiston stood up first. He smoothed his tie and held up the document that had started this nightmare. Your Honour, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. This is a simple case of seller's remorse. Ms. Hartley signed this transfer of deed 3 years ago to settle outstanding debts. Her son, Evan, has been a tenant in good standing. This is a civil contract dispute, nothing more. Nadia did not even flinch. She stood up and walked to the bench, carrying a single thin file. Your Honour, the defence claims my client signed this document in Grey Ridge on June 12th, 3 years ago, Nadia said clearly. However, I am submitting into evidence Ms. Hartley's passport and her employment logs from Northbridge Lines. On that specific date, Eleanor Hartley was aboard a cargo vessel docking in Hamburg, Germany. Unless she has the ability to teleport, that signature is a forgery. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Nadia was not done. She pulled out a flash drive. We also submit a recording taken 9 days ago at the Blackwood residence. Victor stiffened. His voice boomed through the courtroom speakers, crisp and arrogant. The owner is old and rotting in Europe. The idiot kid signed a blank power of attorney? We just filled in the blanks later. No court can save him now. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor sank lower in his chair, his face turning a mottled shade of purple. The judge stared at him over her spectacles, her expression turning into one of pure disgust. Then Noah took the stand. He laid out the pattern. Harborstone was not an investment firm. It was a predator hunting for absentee owners. He listed 3 other properties in the county with identical paperwork irregularities. Lyle Mercer saw the ship sinking. He stood up abruptly. "Your Honour, Harborstone would like to request a recess to discuss a settlement." "No settlement," Nadia said, her voice cutting like a whip. "We want a ruling, and we want a criminal referral." The judge turned her attention to the custody motion. Our family lawyer played the video from the library. The court watched as Lily laughed at my stories, relaxed and happy. Then she read Evan's sworn statement about the threats Victor had made. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, her voice cold. "Using a child as leverage to facilitate property fraud is a level of depravity this court rarely sees." Victor opened his mouth to argue, but Melissa suddenly stood up. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face. "It was not my idea," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I did not want to do it. Garrick said we just needed to copy her signature from an old check. He said she was never coming back. I only signed as a witness because I was scared we would lose everything." Garrick Pierce turned white. The room erupted into chaos. The gavel banged, but the war was over. The Blackwood defense had crumbled from the inside out. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal. She granted me immediate temporary possession of the property on Maple Hollow. She issued a restraining order barring Harborstone and the Blackwoods from the premises. And she ordered the district attorney to open an investigation into forgery and real estate fraud. Regarding Lily, she ordered an immediate review of the custody arrangement, granting Evan expanded visitation rights and removing the restrictions on my contact with her. 2 hours later, Evan and I stood on the porch of the house on Maple Hollow. It was empty. The Blackwoods had been given 1 hour to vacate under police supervision. The house was silent, stripped of the noise and the tension that had suffocated it for years. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a new set of keys I had cut that morning. I pressed them into Evan's hand. "It is just a house." "Evan," I said softly, "we can sell it. We can burn it. We can live in it. But whatever we do, we decide. You are not a guest here anymore." Evan looked down at the silver metal in his palm. He closed his fingers around it, making a fist. When he looked up at me, the dull, beaten look was gone. In his eyes, I saw a spark of the 10-year-old boy who used to dream of castles. He looked like a man who had finally remembered who he was. "Thanks, Mom," he said, and for the first time in 15 years, he didn't sound like he was apologizing for existing. "Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am really curious to know where you are all tuning in from today." So please leave a comment down below and let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed following this journey with me, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and give us a hype so this story can reach even more people.